Alexander. I am the Development Associate at the Magnum Foundation. Welcome. We are so happy to have 10 by 10 photo books here with us today. Magnum Foundation, we are an organization that expands creativity and diversity in visual storytelling, activating new audiences and ideas through innovative use of images. We invite you to browse, excuse me, our current exhibition, Counter Histories, featuring 4 of our grantees who are exploring state and official archives through their work. That's the exhibition that's around right now, and please take some of our materials. To learn more about our work, you can sign up for a newsletter, which is at the back of the room, and a couple of other housekeeping things before we get started. There is a all-gender bathroom at the back of our space, and masks and hand sanitizer over by the wine, so you can get all of your needs in one. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me or anybody else, Jasmine in the back, and I'll hand it over now to 10 by 10. Fred.
Hi, I'm Karen Cortez-Sklar. I manage the 10 by 10 salons with co-founders Russet Letterman and Olga Yatskovich. Dave Solo runs our grant programs, and Jeff Gutterman helps with photography and publications. We are very happy to be hosting this salon at Magnum Foundation. A big thank you to Jasmine Chang, Kristen Lubin, and the entire Magnum Foundation for facilitating this salon. 10 by 10 Photobooks is a community-oriented organization that champions and facilitates thoughtful and passionate engagement with the photo book through its focus on contemporary practice, overlooked publications, stories, and creators in photo book histories. Founded in 2012, 10 by 10 is a visionary leader in the photo book field, supporting diversity and creative exchange through public photo events, including reading rooms, salons, publications, grants, and partnerships with arts organizations. If you like what we do and who we support, please consider donating to 10 by 10 via our website, 10by10photobooks.org, or pre-ordering our new book, Flashpoint, Protest Photography in Print, which releases in the US in November. There's a copy in the back for everyone to browse, along with a QR code to make a pre-order. Tonight we have a very special panel, Photography and Photo Books in the Age of AI, featuring Fred Ritchin, Brian Palmer, and Alexey Yurenev. With artificial intelligence fundamentally transforming photography and image making, tonight's presentations will look at its impact within photography in general, and more specifically within the field of photo books. Please note that their presentations will follow one after another, with time at the end for discussion and audience questions. Please note that their presentations will follow, oh, excuse me, I just said that. Sorry. A reminder to turn off all of your cell phones, please. Please take some time to browse books by our presenters. Alexey Yurenev has brought his artist book, Seeing Against Seeing, and Brian Palmer has also brought a book, The Afterlife of Jim Crow, and they're at the back. Fred Ritchin is a writer, educator, photography critic, Dean Emeritus of the International Center of Photography. Ritchin was also the founding director of the Documentary Photography and Photojournalism program at the ICP, professor of photography and imaging at New York's University Tisch School of the Arts, and co-director of the NYU Magnum Foundation Photography and Human Rights educational program. His forthcoming book, The Synthetic Eye, Thames and Hudson, 2024, is a revelatory glimpse into the future of photography, one where the very nature of how images are created is fundamentally transformed by artificial intelligence. This book looks at photography's strengths, what it has meant for individuals and for society, its massive transformations caused by a variety of factors in the digital age, and the newer possibilities for image making. Brian Palmer is a visual journalist and educator based in Richmond, Virginia. Palmer is a former CNN correspondent, U.S. News and World Report photographer, and U.S. News Beijing bureau chief. He is a co-founder of the Writing with Light campaign, whose statement of principles assert that the integrity of the photographer as the author of the image is considered to be paramount in establishing the photograph's veracity, and defines nonfiction photography as a recording of the visible in which the photographer strives to represent actualities, events, people, etc., in a fair and accurate manner with appropriate context.
That was Fred and me.
Fred and you. Alexey Yurenev is a photographer and visual researcher interested in how technology shapes the production of knowledge and collective memory. Yurenev's projects have been published in the New York Times, National Geographic, and Topic, and exhibited at Foam Museum. Since 2019, Yurenev has been working on a visual research project, Silent Hero, investigating capacities and limitations of technologies, such as machine learning, photography, forensic imaging, and interviews with the survivors of generating proximity to his histories. His recent book, Seeing Against Seeing, generated with the aid of AI, arose from a collaboration with the designer Toon van der Heijden, an Anti-Krieg museum in Berlin. Please welcome Fred Ritchin, Brian Palmer, and Alexey Yurenev. We're going to start with Fred.
Hi, everybody. We're going to try to do 20 minutes each, an enormous amount of stuff, so bear with us, and at the end we'll have a conversation about it. As I was coming, I was trying to contextualize what's going on, and just imagine ourselves in about 1845, we're all representational painters, and this thing called photography came around. And we're kind of scared. It does all this sort of stuff faster than we do. And it does it better in terms of detail, cheaper, and so on and so forth. The good news, of course, for the painters was later on you had Impressionism, Cubism, Minimalism, and so on and so forth. It wasn't the end of painting. But I think at the same time what we have to do is recognize that what we think of as photography is no longer the universe in which we live. It's a very different universe at this point. The way I see it is we had optical photography in the 20th century. It was the light coming through the lens recorded on the film, and then we went into computational photography. In the digital era, 92% of photographs are made by cell phones, and the software inside the cell phones and elsewhere in post-production, Photoshop and so on, enhances, quote unquote, the image. Often you have no control of it. You don't know what's happening. It does it. It's a consumer strategy that's used by camera manufacturers. I'm often in a museum, I photograph with a cell phone, a Rembrandt, let's say, suddenly it's illuminated in ways it never was when I looked at it. So the lens itself was subverted in computational photography, it's evidence. And now with AI, synthetic imaging, we don't even need a camera. So we've gone from the optical, which is the camera lens, to the subversion of the lens, and now the replacement of the camera. We're getting photorealistic images from algorithms at this point. They take seconds to make, and I've been doing this over 50 years, and I often cannot tell the difference between what is made by AI and not. It's like the beginning of digital imaging, if you remember. People said, don't worry about it, the film has such greater resolution than digital, and that lasted for about 5 minutes, and it was wrong. And we were often reassuring ourselves, oh, 6 fingers instead of 5, don't worry about it. Of course they're gonna fix that. We have to be concerned. And to me, just in today's Instagram, if you've been following social media, there's an image of a little girl on a boat in the floods in the southeastern US, supposedly, holding a little puppy dog, wearing a life jacket, and she's terrified. And there's a big debate online, is that AI or not AI? And one response I think is telling, and I think that's really the universe we now live in, is, y'all, I don't know where this photo came from, and honestly, it doesn't matter. It is seared into my mind forever. There are people going through much worse than what is shown in this pic, so I'm leaving it because it's emblematic of the trauma and pain people are living through right now. It's like Eugene Smith a long time ago said, let truth be the prejudice, if you remember. You know, you could change the image, you could do whatever you want with the image. The truth is what matters. People have their truths, and if the image does not confirm it, you make a new image. If you're in the red states or the blue states, you do that. If you're pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli, you do that. More and more, the truth is what you want it to be. It's consumer entitlement. You get what you want. The photography was always dialectical. It shows you stuff you may not want to see. Maybe you need to lose 5 pounds. It shows you that. Now, the software means you're svelte. You don't have to do anything. Maybe you couldn't afford the vacation. Now you're tanned. There's no problem. Maybe you divorced your partner and it's a problem. No problem. I had a friend in Switzerland who ran a photo lab, and one of his jobs was to remove the divorced partner from all the family albums. No problem. So I'm going to show you this stuff quickly, and I don't mean to be offensive, but what I am is sort of a canary in a coal mine. I put text prompts in for the AI systems to see what they'll do. And sometimes they do horrific things in terms of making images, stuff they're not supposed to be able to do, and they do it consistently. So I am able to distort numerous histories, even though I do not want to. So let's go here. Does this work, or did I do the wrong thing? You press the down button, right? Yeah. Okay, so now it's going. So these I'm just showing you a few AI images, but it doesn't go when I press it.
Where do you point? Where should Fred be pointing?
I'm pointing.
Yeah. Can you point to the other way?
I point that way?
Yeah.
Now I want to go back because I went too fast. Yeah, no, that's what I just did. Okay, so I'm starting over. So these are all AI images to different prompts. I'm putting a few words in, and within usually about 10 to 15 seconds at this point, I'm usually getting 4 images to choose from. So this was the aura of the original, was the prompt. This person never existed. I'm able to do pictorialist style, various styles, say the date. None of these are photographs. AI images are never photographs, even though they're called that. These people never existed, but I can make my own histories. And you could play around with it in all kinds of ways. So for example, at this point, it will not let me use the word bikini, but yesterday I showed Brian, and I'm not showing you, I asked for something about warm, deep love, and it gave me an image of pedophilia. What looks like a father embracing the daughter and kissing her on the lips. That's what it gave me. I'm not showing you everything. This is the Vietnam War, soldiers making selfies. This is the back cover of my new book. And this is, what's the matter? But I can't see the... So Stieglitz making a selfie. I'm giving a talk at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in a couple of weeks, and this is the promo. Of course, Stieglitz died about 60 years ago, and iPhone started in 2008. So this is the ticker tape parade for American soldiers in New York City after the Vietnam War ended in 1975. Anybody who was around then remembers that when the soldiers came back from Vietnam, they took off their uniforms in Greyhound bus stations because people accused them of being baby killers and spit in their face. There was never a ticker tape parade. Street scene in Berlin in 1815. So not only was there no photography then, but there were no cars then. So this is the cover of one of the books I'm working on right now. The prompt for this was iconic photograph from the year 1945. This is one of the scariest images to me that I did not want the AI to do. I asked for spectators at the Victory Parade in Berlin in 1945. This is it. I have multiple like this. I do not want this to be true. I'm often asking it to do things hoping it will not do the things that it does. And I often think of the high school kid who's doing a research project who's going to find images like this or make images like this. And there's no guardrails. A photograph of an overweight concentration camp prisoner, that doesn't exist. If I was an anti-Semite or a pro-Nazi, I now have two great images to show how nice the Nazis were and how we won the war. Do you understand? I could be 14 years old and doing this. You don't need a license. It costs me probably about 2 cents an image, and it takes about 15 seconds to do, and you could do it at 4 o'clock in the morning. A concentration camp survivor by August Sonder. There's a massive issue here. Can you use the style or the work of a photographer living or dead to make new images? Nobody's figured that out yet in terms of, the law. Right now it's an ethical choice. My problem with the images I make is I cannot forget them. This defines for me World War II, even though I know they're fake. So this is even more troubling to me. What the algorithms are doing is giving you usually a lot of white people. So they're correcting them. So now if you search for Nazis, you'll get black people as Nazis. If you're searching for 19th century US senators, they give you women. There were no women senators. There were no black Nazis, but they want to be quote unquote fair. So they're distorting it. So the one on the right is happy slaves. I couldn't believe that it would do that. It did it. And the one on the left is happy plantation owners, 1855 Mississippi. It's disgusting. And that's what I'm getting. And if I put this online, the new AI systems will train on my images. And they will further distort history. And if I am a high school teacher somewhere in the United States or anywhere, and my students do these research projects, what am I going to do? They say, Google found it. This is another one that disturbs me enormously. Happy prisoners on a Texas chain gang. There's no resistance to these prompts. The only resistance I get is anything that's a little bit about nudity. That I have a problem now doing, at least the systems I'm using. This one's interesting. I asked for the perfect family. So here we have the issue. We have Tiananmen Square, the tank man, anonymous. Nobody knows who he is. He's disappeared. But this is the Amnesty International considers this the image that's most emblematic of what they're about, the freedom of people to resist, to do the right thing. On Google, a few months ago, when you did a search for Tank Man, this guy, who's anonymous, nobody knows him, my thumb is, there we go. That's what you got. Number 1 on the Google search, the image search. So this is coming from Reddit. It's an AI image, a synthetic image of the tank man making a selfie. I did it a few days later as number 6 on Google. Google recently announced that in their image search, they're going to allow you to make the image you want, not to find it. So you're going to be empowered to make up your own version of history, if you want it. And you notice the resistance in this country to Google. It's enormous. I mean, there's probably 2 people upset about this somewhere who I haven't met yet, except for Brian. I met Brian. Now, this should not be white. So this is the storming of the US Capitol, January 6th. This is done by invoking the spirit of Robert Capa. Robert Capa died in 1954. So the idea you could bring back people to make imagery is problematic, but a lot of the work that I do is working with non-photographers. If Plato were to make an image, Socrates to make an image, what would it be? Sometimes it's really interesting. So this is a jazz musician, 20th century jazz musician photographing Harlem. The prompt I used with Duke Ellington. To me, there's a rhythm to it, it's interesting, and so on and so forth. Because one thing about digital, once it's code, you could output it at any medium you want. If you have the code for a painting, you could output it as music. If you have the code for the music, you could output it as a novel. The digital code, the zeros and ones, could output in any way you want. It's not multimedia that's interesting, it's transmedia that's interesting, in which the code, you're doing what you want. So you can have a jazz painting using Ellington, for example, or a photograph. So this is biblical. This is David and Goliath. I'm the only photographer who was there. I have an exclusive. See my agent. Brian, who's my agent? This is the Salem witch trial, 1692. Okay, so we're looking at this because we're all not 12 years old. If I was 12 years old looking at this, I'd be terrified of David and Goliath in my Bible stories, and I would assume that's what they looked like. So what the AI is doing is creating these histories for us from way in the past, from far away, and some of them are completely distorted, some of them are interesting. This is the cover of my book, which has now been delayed by the publisher for a few months, but this is Romantic Martians as seen from the point of view of H.G. Wells. As you know, H.G. Wells wrote about the Martians, the radio play when everybody was terrified of the Martians, and so on and so forth. So the problem is what they call poisoning the well. Once you've seen what I showed you, are you going to believe this? Are you going to believe any photographs? Are you going to be skeptical? For me, I'm skeptical at this point. So this is said to be Kamala Harris in college. Do you believe it? I mean, the problem now is that you're not sure if you can believe it. How do you know to believe it or not? How does this look different than AI? This is Elon Musk and Trump. Do you believe it? Now, I don't believe this image, because to me this image is kind of a hyper-real image. It's made to almost constructed with the American flag with the fist. That's not what he looked like most of the time. When you get shot, your fist is not in the air. This is a kind of a fabrication, even though it is a photograph. So the photographs itself could be emblematic in the same way that the AI is. This I did because all the newspaper headlines were, you cannot do this, the elections are coming. You cannot do anything with political figures. I think I did this the next day. As far as I know, they never met each other. Nor did Putin go to the beach with her. Now, I did the first color photograph of the president of Bayeux by a paparazzi. Bayeux happens to be the name of the street next to where we live in Paris. There is no president of Bayeux, but I could tell you his entire story and you're going to believe it, because it looks photographic. And again, anybody could do what I'm doing. How about this? Is AI supposed to be able to do that? No, that's what you read in the newspapers, but it doesn't. By the way, that was Kamala Harris in college. So the one on the right is the one I would have chosen as a photo editor. I would not have won the one on the left. The one on the left is a tendency in society to make these symbolic, emblematic images even when they're not deserved. So in a way, you could argue that what the AI is doing is following the tracks of a very, very minimal use of photography to explore, to interpret, to get inside things. It's just looking for the easy symbol. And what AI is doing is, to me, it's a conceptual medium, which is finding the easy symbols often. What it does, it scans billions and billions of images online, it learns from them, and it makes images. And so it's learned from our sort of superficial use of photography over and over again. Samsung argues that there's no such thing as a real picture. You know, they're the cell phone people with cell phone cameras, so they're saying it's all arbitrary anyway. Forget optical photography, it's all made up. We could do anything we want. There is no real picture. Adobe says AI is the new digital camera. We don't need a camera anymore, we have AI. They're the people who bring us Photoshop. They really didn't mean to bring us Photoshop. They made money from it, but they're not interested in photography. They're not interested in the depiction of what's out there. They're interested in making money. And it becomes very clear when you see that they're selling fake AI images of the war in Israel-Gaza. Adobe is spearheading the Content Authenticity Initiative, New York Times, BBC, and so on. But they are selling these fake images that anybody anywhere in the world could make of conflicts. Black Lives Matter is online. Houses for Ukraine, a dynamic shot of activists, concept of nonviolent direct action. This is AI. This is Adobe selling it. And publications are running it. So this is the image of a street protest capturing the authentic emotions and expressions, but she does not exist. So this is Adobe. This is our corporations. And at the same time, they run the Content Authenticity Initiative, restoring trust and transparency in the age of AI. But nobody points out the dichotomy. It's like Exxon greenwashing. It's the same exact thing. But there's no resistance in the photo community. People are saying, I'm not going to buy Photoshop, I'm not going to do this because you've abandoned us. We should be doing that. So this is just a few more, and I'll pass the mic. You know, as we know, Pol Pot, there was the execution of many, many Cambodians. They made record photographs before the execution, and some guy had this brilliant idea of colorizing them and making some of them smile before they were executed. It was published in Vice magazine, and only because of the Cambodian government intervening did they take it down. So these are the tools we're giving people, and this is Vice magazine went along with it. This is the Auschwitz Museum. They thought that black and white photographs of the prisoners were not engaging enough for the people coming, the visitors. So they had a Brazilian artist colorize them so they would be more engaging. This is not just your average person in the basement. My time is over, but I'm almost done. This is Amnesty. There were street protests in Bogota, and security forces beat up people. They ran this, it was an AI image. Their argument was that way they can't arrest anybody because they don't exist, the police. But at the same time, a lot of people are not going to support people who don't exist. They took it down pretty quickly. So this is, I have about 2 or 3 things to show because I know I'm running over.
It's fine.
In Australia, the Morris Blackburn law firm was representing refugees who were kept offshore, abused. There's cases of rape, all kinds of violence from the guards. Photographers are, for the most part, not allowed. So they took 300 hours of testimony from the prisoners, abused, and they made AI images, synthetic images of what they recounted, the prisoners, because there were no photographs allowed. The fire, to present in court. The court case was thrown out before it went to court for some kind of reasoning, but the idea being that if there's no photographer present, the subject, the person abused, could now make the images. You could argue at that point in police abuse and so on and so forth, maybe the photographer is insufficient because they show up for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. They don't know this story. Maybe you have to talk to the person abused to then have them make the images of the abuse. The problem with that is then the abusers could say, we'll make our own images and show how nice we were. Do you understand? It's opened up a whole vista of possibility. This is, again, the same. So, it's in the back, but what they do is they come out in strips. This one is, we're doing a book with Shreya on this. This is the after image. Sometimes I find the AI is really kind of smart and interesting in ways I never thought of. This is a photograph of an unhappy algorithm. It's very hard to photograph an unhappy algorithm. I've spent many hours trying. This is a photograph of an uncertain future by a quantum physicist. I've done a lot of work with quantum physicists using AI because it understands it to a certain extent, I find. A photograph of peace. This is a sexist photograph, the way AI defines it. And sometimes it has insights. Sometimes that I wouldn't think of. Finally, this is a forbidden photograph. So just to end, I come from, and many of us come from, a generation where photographs could affect change. They could change the world for the better. Earthrise, 1968, the first time we saw the Earth from outer space. 16 months later, we had Earth Day, the beginning of the Earth movement. We had these kinds of images, like the one on the bottom, the year after the US withdrew all its troops from Vietnam. The one on the top, similarly, troop reduction. And then we have the big lie, Tiananmen Square. It's almost impossible to conceive now of using photographs to have this kind of impact, to stand up to governments, to do all that the way they did. In my opinion, the last iconic photograph was 2015 of Aylan Kurdi, the Syrian boy who drowned on the beach, to move the world to do something. We may never see that again. This is the era we're now living in now, that image of Aylan Kurdi, and that used all over the world. This, Gideon Mendel, there was a reluctance by Western governments and NGOs to give antiretroviral medicines to HIV-positive people in Africa for racist reasons. But I asked them the UNAIDS, and they said 8 million people are now on treatment because of his photographs showing people getting better. A lot of millions of people can be helped. I worked on the end of polio, or this, Millennium Development Goals. This project we did with the UN, there are supposedly 21 to 27 million people alive today who would not be alive otherwise. So what we're giving up with photography as a credible medium is the ability to intervene in other people's lives in constructive ways. That's what's at risk. It's not photography that concerns me. It's use in the world as a positive potential to do different things. So lastly, we had a Not a Lens icon, 1994, and with Susan we worked on another project. We could have been labeling pictures for 30 years if they're highly retouched. We could be doing this. The guy on the right is a concentration camp survivor who doesn't exist. We could be doing things like this. Governments are probably not going to do it. Corporations are certainly not going to do it. I think our community is the one that's going to have to figure this out and push it one way or another. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fred. All right, so let's see if I can pilot this. Hi, folks. Thanks for sitting up front, Cynthia. Great to see all of these wonderful people who I haven't seen in a long time. I'll say first that I exist. I am imperfect and subjective, but I exist. And when I first saw Fred's presentation, really when Fred and I first talked about 1.5 years ago, I think, I was really kind of terrified to my toes about the future of photography and about everything. Whoops, I did not mean to go to that yet. But working with Writing with Light, working with Fred, it's only strengthened my faith in the power of the nonfiction image. I show this image from 2010 from Dhaka by my wife, Erin Holloway Palmer, because I was there. I was in the flesh and blood, brick and mortar world dealing with these kids near the Dhaka train station. Maybe some of them will remember that day. I know I do. And it was important to me. And that's a kind of a transparency, right? We can go back to that neighborhood. We can look at my work in context over 36 some odd years. And see where I'm coming from. So this is a piece of the statement about the use of generative AI in nonfiction photography, and by that we mean photojournalism or regular documentary photography. Generative artificial intelligence capable of creating photorealistic images without the use of a camera, in particular image generators like DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion, poses an existential threat to photojournalism and journalism as a whole. It's my view that AI is antithetical to photojournalism principles and purposes, and on and on. You can read more about that. I believe that, and I believe that my presence in these places matters. Fred said something to me 18 years ago as I sat on his porch after coming back from Iraq. My pictures weren't selling, and I was wondering why. You know, you'll see a few of them. They're very quiet. I didn't follow the bombs. And Fred said, listen, I do what I do to be useful to the people I write about. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because back in the day, I photographed to get pictures in Time, Newsweek, and I mean, I had a heart. I've always been committed to social justice, but I think my brain was really kind of oriented to getting published. And Fred kind of reoriented me, like, right, I want to be useful. And I've really been thinking about being useful for the past 10 or so years. I've always thought about it, but now it's really critical to me as AI creeps in and as the power of the individual image completely, explodes. So these are just samples of recent works. I've lived in Virginia for 10 years now, which just seems like time flies, documenting Confederate public investment in Confederate sites, the resilience of lost cause and white supremacist myths, and neglected African American cemeteries, of which there are thousands. And there's currently a show up at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. Susan Worsham and I have a teeny show up on the 3rd floor, which is a companion to the Long Arc, which is a huge, huge show on photography in the American South from 1845. So go see it if you're in Richmond. We really need to start the year of my birth, 1964. So to give you a sense of why I still care about nonfiction images and why I think we can all kind of perhaps come together around some of the things that matter to us. So this is what folks were driving when I was born. This is from National Geographic. We were Buick people, but I couldn't find a Buick ad, so I did Chevys instead. So that's me in Queens, where I was born. I can't remember the hospital. It's either Booth Memorial or something, but we were rocking that 1960s decor. You'll see what was in the front pages of the New York Times the day after my birth. It's kind of eerily similar, right? The countries are different, but President calls U.S. open-minded on nuclear fleet. Uttant asks delay in UN, and jury in cancer case absolves cigarettes. So we still have sort of issues of corporate irresponsibility and Saigon Buddhists to resist regime. So it's kind of a throwback, but it's also kind of like, whoa, we're still in a similar state. This happened. This is not AI. Photo by Marion Trocosco is available through the Library of Congress. Formative for me, seeing these images. Charles Moore, Bill Hudson, black and white photograph of two African-American men and an African-American woman being sprayed with high-pressure fire hoses. So when I first saw these images, I was about 10, and it was actually on CBS News, so they were moving images. You talk about images being seared in your mind. My image of America changed when I saw these images. This is from 1968, so I wasn't even 4 years old yet. My mother was paranoid, concerned, let's say, that I would be sacrificed on the altar of American militarism when I came of age. And she was just terrified. Black and white TV was on during the news hour. This is what shaped me. This is what formed me. So I went into photography, worked at the Village Voice. I studied in China, a few months after Tiananmen, I will not make the Tim Walsh mistake and say I was in Tiananmen on June 4th, because I was not, but I did travel through China a few months after that. I misunderstood what this soldier was saying to me. I thought, you want to take a picture? Go ahead. What he actually said is, let's take a picture together. So I made one frame, and he was pointing at his commander, who was on a rooftop with, I assume, a sniper. I didn't see the sniper. I saw the commander looking at me through binoculars, so I got one frame. I was on the streets, shooting for the Village Voice, impact visuals. Again, I was here. This is history. This matters. Not only can you look at my pictures, but you can look at TL Lit, you can look at Donna Binder, you can look at Jim West, you can look at all the people who were there with me at the time. Transparency and context matter. So around 1989, 1990, I got hit by the post-structuralism, postmodern bus. And it sucked all of the, I don't know, motivation and creativity out of me, because this idea that the author is dead, representation is bad, really stopped me in my tracks. Y'all remember that? It's like Bart and all those, doesn't anybody remember that? Like, and it, you know, there is no, originality is dead, we're all down with pastiche, and I thought, wait a minute. And then feminist theory and multicultural folks came to the rescue, and they said, well, wait a minute, like, we've been excluded from the canon, and you're saying subjectivity doesn't matter. Nuh-uh, we have to have our time. So I thought about that, and I thought, okay, yeah, I want to have my time too. And now, what I realize, and what I realized then, was that all we have is our integrity. And I've said that, I think, with Accra, wonderful photographer there, and seeing the work of people who are invested in the world. All we have is our integrity, whatever tools we use, notebook, camera, whether it's computational camera with a sensor, yeah. But I use Photoshop in a very particular way to kind of mimic what I do in the darkroom. Does that make it clean and pure and whatever? No, but I will tell you, and I will provide transparency about how I do what I do. So spent a lot of time on the streets in New York, as I said, working for The Voice. Again, I was there. And then I switched to making a living. How am I doing with time? How's the time doing? Okay, I'm halfway. It was interesting. So going from the Village Voice, demonstrations, riots, uprisings, to the White House, being able to pay my rent, pay back student loans, ride on Air Force One, and take pictures of political theater. This is what Fred was alluding to with that Trump photo. So I tried to pull back here, but really what US News and World Report, does anyone remember US News and World Report? Yeah, what, Alice of course does, Lori does, yes. What they wanted was that, the expressive gesture, and I had to give them that. But I tried to do more. So there are deep fictions embedded here and there, and that got a bit tiresome. So through kind of a strange confluence of events, I became the Beijing bureau chief. I studied Chinese as an undergrad and studied in China and wrote stuff that US News kind of wanted and took my own pictures. And that didn't last forever. Went to CNN. So what I'm doing here is I'm getting experience in a wide range of media, but I'm also still I'm still intoxicated and embedded in a corporate system, trying to resist it from the inside, but not really succeeding. Having my cake and eating it too, and that wasn't possible, so I quit. Did some stories on Thai boxing in Thailand and the US, went to training camps, and I just traveled and really spent the money that I had made at CNN thinking that my freelance career as a photographer would blow up, and not so much, but I did what I wanted to do, and then the war broke out. One of the great things about working for US News and World Report was that it was very popular among dentists and military officers. So the connections that I made in the early 90s got me a foot in the door and got me halfway to Iraq with 1st Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment. Didn't have great luck getting assignments until Fred said, hey, why don't you do a diary for Pixel Press and report? So I did, and I almost didn't get to go to Iraq because the first group of people I found were a group of goth Marines, including Charles Pearson, like so not your typical Marine thing, and he almost like, they were like, public affairs officers were like, how in the world did you find these guys? Like, why, with the mascara and everything? But it was important for me to start there, and they did let me go. So I embedded, I understood that I would be covering the people keeping me alive, and that there were definite limitations. Didn't speak Arabic, I understood all that, but I did want to see what US troops were doing in my name. There was also a little bit of that secret macho bullshit there that you're not a real reporter until you've done war. I didn't admit that to any of my loved ones, but it was pretty obvious. And in the end, after 3 separate trips, this is where I ended up. And we can talk some about there. But so for the last 10 years, and I'm getting toward the end here, 5 minutes, excellent. I found a picture after my dad died in 2011, 9 old black people standing behind handmade headstones. That's my dad, second from the left. I knew where he was. He was at Camp Perry. Does anyone know what Camp Perry is? That's where the farm, the secret CIA base is. So I wanted bragging rights to visit, and I knew I could because if you have someone buried there, that's my great-grandfather, Matt Palmer, you can go. So I could brag to you and other journalists like, yep, I've been to the CIA base. If you? So I went, and it opened a door in American history to me. History that had been obscured, erased, distorted, and if you do the math, you can kind of figure out 1840s, right? So this gentleman, Matt Palmer, it's the only photograph of him, my great-grandfather. He was enslaved. He served in the Union Army. His wife, Julia Fox Palmer, my great-grandmother, her family escaped slavery as he did. I knew none of this. My family knew none of this. My wife, Erin, and I dug all this out. His owner, Alexander Mabon Hobson, lived in this place. We found that information on Matt Palmer's union pension application. Had the owner had a common name like John Smith, we wouldn't have been able to find him. But Alexander Mabon Hobson, that's his house. That led us to cemeteries, because people like Matt Palmer and Julia Fox Palmer and the other 500,000 people who escaped slavery during the Civil War, very little information exists on them as individuals, right? So they may be listed by first name or not at all in wills, plantation inventories next to the livestock, the toilet, the commode, that sort of stuff. But you can find texts in cemeteries, like Matt Palmer's headstone. So I started spending an inordinate amount of time in cemeteries with my wife, Erin, first photographing, and then actually doing the work of reclamation along with descendants like Mr. Artie Jefferson, who was tending the grave of his life partner of 26 years, Patricia Ann Hardy. The Pleasance family always comes out, Veterans Day, Mother's Day, Memorial Day, to take care of their plot at East End, which I'm proud to say we have cleared to about 80% over 10 years, with hands, sweat. I've also done the flip side of things. The afterlife of Jim Crow also includes the affirmative action for dead Confederates, the subsidies that various government entities give to the lost cause, to this white supremacist version of history, which includes monuments and flags, and the flags are the symbol, the monuments and the cemeteries are the physical manifestation and the place where this money goes. So I did I was in Richmond for the coming down of the monuments and for the community's occupation of these sites that had been exclusive, whites only, or white-friendly zones. And it was pretty amazing. This confrontation with history and with myth, the lost cause myth, was a pretty heady time. Last slides. I've done pieces on American homegoing, so African American deathways. Again, I was there. I'm doing this work. It is imperfect, it is subjective, but it exists in the world, as do I. It represents an interaction and engagement with people and things. Brick and mortar, flesh and blood. Like that, which, interesting to find people of color, just kind of freaked me out. But just a brief word, I was having coffee with Ron Haviv and Mark Peterson, and David Buteau, not to drop names too much, but sent Mark that picture. That's a photo illustration, but doesn't it look real? And then within minutes, that picture appeared, the straight image. That kind of rocked my world, but that's not where I want to go. This was just a couple of weekends ago. My style was changing a bit, and then you need a little bit of time to kind of focus on that, but one of the things that we do is when we clear the vegetation off of these burial plots, we also retrieve grave markers that have been under the dirt for 50, 60, 70 years. My wife Erin has found almost 2,000. I found, wait for it, 50. But I take the pictures. So we dig them up carefully, wash them, rinse them, let them out, keep them out in the sun. So this is the direction that I'm heading, to be a little bit more lyrical, a little bit less literal, but all part of the same story. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I think I'm going to sit here. I think I've just realized why I was invited here, because I think my work and what I do lies exactly in between of these spaces. I am present and absent. I am subjective. I distort and clarify history all at the same time, and it's not that bad for me. But yeah, tell me when I can click. So my trip with the eye started about 5 years ago in a setting similar to this, but it was in Moscow, where I saw a talk by Fred, where he was making us all feel very vigilant and sober about the advance of technology. And he showed this one example of this project called This Person Doesn't Exist, which is, I don't know, for those who are not familiar, it was this is 2019, so it's Paleolithic age of AI. So it was a website where you were, by clicking on it, you're confronted with an image of a person that doesn't exist. And that image looks like a photograph. It has this indexical relationship to the real, but it's not. And I think that seeing that image and going back to that website after and refreshing that browser over and over was kind of a profound moment in my career at the time as a photojournalist and a documentary photographer, where I could clearly demarcate before and after, in meaning that, like, asking myself a question: what does it mean to be a photographer in a time when technologies such as, GAN or AI exists, and also at the same time questioning, like, how can I use this tech that's often used for something so nefarious like deep fakes for something meaningful? So speaking of absence, I started thinking of what I can do with this technology and what is the model of AI? What is the promise of AI? The promise of photojournalism, like Brian said, is to show us places and people that exist, but where we can't be as an audience. So AI's promise is show us people and places that never existed but could have. So I grew up in Russia, in Moscow. I was born in '86, 41 years after the World War II ended, but it felt like it ended 2 weeks before I was born, because this memory was reinforced by so many, like the images, archives, films, carnations, monuments. My grandfather was a veteran. He lost his brother in the war. He fought the war till Berlin, but never spoke about his acts, heroic acts, or his experiences. He remained silent. And in Russia, they say that true heroes keep their silence, and the ones that talk are embellishers and confabulators. So when he passed away in 2009, before he passed away, he told me that as his only grandson, I'm responsible of carrying his memories and his medals. So when he died, I got the medals, but not his memories. And the narrative of the war was, so proliferated and used to, it was the end of the Soviet Union, so it's a religion. The rhetoric around it is so reinforced by all these symbols. And if I look at the family archive, I was just trying to think, like, what did the war feel like? What it could have remembered like? So I'm looking at these archive images, and in a way that what they represented, his war happened in a photography studio, and the unimaginable that I was seeking, was hidden and cloaked in the smoke and the museum charge of a flash and of the studio picture taking. And going into state archives and thinking of the archival images that my memory was so full of and this narrative was built on, in fact, were staged, such as this image by Evgeny Khaldei, the raising of the flag on Reichstag. So this image was taken a week late after the Reichstag fell. And the flag, in fact, is a tablecloth sourced from the TASS agency because they couldn't find the banner. And also the watch on the man's hand on the bottom right was removed because he had two, one on the left and one on the right, so it was assumed to be looted, but it actually could have been a compass, but for safety reasons, they just retouched it out. Sky was darkened for dramatization. So I was trying to find a different type of image. So I was like, if I'm working with this AI, I'm not looking to recreate photography. I'm not looking to recreate archive, because it's already like, I want something else. I don't want a statistical image. I want something deeper than that. So long story short, it was COVID. And while many of us were learning how to make sourdough bread, I was learning how to code Python. And I was decided to go under the hood of this AI system called GAN, Generative Adversarial Neural Networks. And the way it works, there's two neural networks. One of them is a critic, the other one is a forger, and they both are trained on an archive of images. It's a really data-hungry machine. It needs thousands and thousands of images. The example I described before, if this person doesn't exist, uses millions of images. Mine was dwarf. It was like 35,000. So, and I had to personally inspect the image, sort them. I made two data sets. One was battlefields. The other one was a war actor, as they called, which consisted of soldiers. And I let it train for days and days, and learning from my mistakes again. I'm not a coder. I'm just, at that point, had no knowledge. So after it was done, I got a result. It looked like this. It's uneventful, but was really representative of what I knew about my grandfather in the time of the war, which is pretty much great grid of images. But then thousands and thousands of cycles later, my machine started producing these abstractions. And maybe I'm biased, and I'm so used to seeing these images of war, and I grew up with them, and I look through this archive, and when I look at them, I see war. I see explosions, I see battles, I see concentration camps. It's all resembling all these images I digested along with the algorithm. And this training process truly felt collaborative. I wasn't even sure at that point who's training who and what is this machine producing. One important thing to say too is that I was going against the rules while training the machine. The way you're supposed to train these machines, when you get images that don't resemble photography and deviate from the data set, you're supposed to correct the vector. And what I was doing, in fact, was reinforcing it to do what it wants to do. Because I wasn't looking for another photograph, I was looking for an image and these glitches and imperfections to find a different type of meaning I couldn't find in photography. So to verify my own subjectivity and perception, I decided to create another feedback system and upload them into Google's Cloud Vision, which is the system responsible for categorization and classification of images of what we know as Google image search. So when I upload these abstractions, as you see, with about 85% confidence, it's calling it military uniform, history, ancient history, monochrome photography, infantry, army, portrait photography, military person. So here I was, kind of engaging with this perception game with the machine and trying to verify my own vision. What do I see and what does the machine see? And then another data set, as I said, the second data set was war actors, which consisted of soldiers similar to the pictures of my grandfather posing in the field full of honor and glory. What AI did was really interesting here for me, because it turned from these of the soldiers in their poses in the field, it turned them into monsters. So here for me, the machine intelligence appears not to be only statistical, but psychological. It shows that the true face of war is grotesque. Let's go back to this image. So I started thinking of what to do with these images, and I showed them to a designer I collaborate with, Toon van der Heijden. Oops, what happened? Well, anyway, you remember that image. Yeah, it's in your use our imagination. But yeah, so this image on the right that my GAN produced. As I said, my data set consisted only of the images of World War II, and it took these healthy soldiers and turned them into monsters. So I was showing it to Toon, and Toon was like, wait a second, I know this image. And he thought of this book by German anarcho-pacifist Ernst Friedrich, who wrote this book in 1924, collecting war evidence of World War I, and showing the atrocities and horror and destruction of wars, trying to pleading to the government's man of all kind to stop the future wars. And what turned out to be that for someone who works with AI, I only generated about 150 images with my machine. And about 50 of them had a doppelganger inside this book. So for me, this was the beginning of the book that you see on the table over there. Just gonna skip through this video in a second just for time's sake. But for me, this became, I wanted to make like a conversation between me and Ernst Friedrich, between these technologies that create a dialectic between technologies separated by a century, where Ernst Friedrich calls photography the only form of evidence, war photography is the only form of evidence that results from credible witnessing, while I argue that these AI images I produce are also a form of war evidence that doesn't arrive from credible witnessing. So it's, and whether it is World War I, World War II, Ukraine, even Gaza, there's a cyclical cadence of histories and cyclical cadence of visualizing conflict. This is the book that you will see on the table as well. I'm just going to go faster for time constraint. Yes, I said it also includes references to like current and full-scale invasion in Ukraine by putting stamps in there. There's a last copy of a postcard that my great uncle sent before he had disappeared from the war. And this happened, again, speaking of being trained by AI, I saw this post on Instagram in April. This is in Gaza, and this is my AI trained in World War II. I'm not sure what that means, but it's, for me, it's the striking resemblance are kind of become evident everywhere. And this project contains many, many chapters, but for halfway, I see, we're halfway there. I'm only going to show 2 chapters to kind of contextualize what, because this is a 10 by 10 photo books and we want to be photo book centric in this specific exercise of feedback and dialectics of visualizing conflicts. And actually, speaking of being present and absent, so here I wanted to be present, and actually, as another step of verification, I reconnected with a community of World War II veterans that are still living in Brighton Beach, New York, that fought for the Red Army. They're my grandfather's contemporaries, and there's about 19 who are still alive who are over 100 years old. And I, at first, attempted to collect their oral histories because it was important to me that this communicative memory is about to disappear and become cultural. And as we see right now with the full-scale invasion, memories of these soldiers and heroes, and including my grandfather, is being weaponized to justify the invasion. So after collecting their own histories, I thought there was one more step one more thing I could do is to show them the work that I was doing with generative AI, and to use it as prompts to renegotiate their history, to recall memories, and just to have a deeper encounter. So I'll show you one scene from the film called No One Has Forgotten.
Does it go louder?
Пап, хорошо, найдем. Ну, дело не то, что красиво, дело в том, что он подходил, понимаешь?
Я понимаю, так
для
вот,
камеры.
по-моему, туда и подходим.
Вот так. Какого цвета ты имеешь в виду?
Вот это хорошо.
Тебе должна Европа смотреть. А в Европе свои вкусы. Это будет хорошо. Не жмет, не давит. Не давит тебе здесь? А? Не давит? Вот это самое. Пуговица не давит.
Надо ровненько, чтобы было.
Ты меня сейчас слышишь?
Не давит.
Не давит пуговица.
Нет, не давит.
Так, сейчас слышишь?
Тучи.
Я работаю над проектом, где я пытаюсь приблизиться к истории памяти моего дедушки, кто воевал во Второй мировой войне, как и вы. Он тоже был на Курской дуге, и был в Первом Белорусском фронте и так далее. Но я ничего не знаю про его историю, он никогда не рассказывал. И мне было очень интересно услышать ваши истории других ветеранов. И сейчас я, так как я фотограф, я в основном изучаю изображения, архивные изображения, разные методы фотографических исследований истории. И сейчас, в 2024 году, существует такая технология под названием искусственный интеллект.
Где?
Искусственный интеллект.
Искусственный интеллект.
Интеллект, да.
Бои, которые тут изображены, это бои танкистов. Бои, которые решали жизни людей. И, конечно, очень больно смотреть на обгорелые тела тех людей, которые погибли в бою. Вот, бегут куда-то или к танку, или от танка. черного дыма горящего. Это страшно. Это вообще изуродованное лицо. Видишь, и уши оттопыренные. И солдатская шапка на нем. Это ведь красивое, интеллигентное лицо человека в берете. А может, это головной убор просто такой? Или без головного убора? Обгоревшая прическа. Это группа людей, которые в колонне шла, тоже попала под огонь. Ну, движется медленно. Это тоже под огонь попало. Крики, боли, крики огня. Вот это более знакомое на лошадях. Первое время были почти все на лошадях. Расчеты. Два уноса, 3 уноса. Не было машин. Это в 43-м году уже, когда нам подбросили тягу, откровенно говоря, американцы. И Виллисы, и Студебекеры, и Додж 3/4, который очень выручал нас, как тягловая сила, очень выручал. Вот я уже говорил, интеллигентное лицо такое приятное было. Ушли люди в вечность, так говорят. Гвоздички одни остались в памяти тех людях, которые погибли.
Sorry. It's the last thing I was just going to add. I know I'm out of time, but there's many other chapters to the project, but this whole search of like leveraging technology and it took a kind of reading it in terms of getting closer to this history I don't know about, you know, and through that search, I mean, many years later, and to understand that, you know, in search for this solid floor in memory or photography or representation, what I've learned is that the floor is actually liquid, and we just need to learn how to swim, not to drown. Thank you very much.
Okay. Brian? So I think you guys saw like multiple perspectives on what to do with the AI, how to resist the AI, you know, Brian's idea of the physical person having to be there, and Alexey pushing it in terms of research, in terms of finding out stuff, and then finding a guy who responds to the images, you know, in a very deep way too. So I think rather than start us discussing because of time, if it's okay with you guys, we could open it up to questions and thoughts, and you know, we can answer in multiple ways. Am I supposed to have a mic again? And if you don't want to ask any questions or say anything, we're happy to talk. We could involve ChatGPT. We could do whatever you want, but it's up to you guys. I mean, it's been a lot, but it's been coming for, you know, for quite a while. Akra?
Thank you. Hey Fred, hi Brian, hi Alexey, wonderful talks, thank you very much. Fred, in your talk, you suggested that we, the people in this room, were going to be the most effective, possibly only exponents for rationality. But as one of the members of the audience, I'm not sure how that works.
You see, I didn't get to the end of my slideshow, but in 1984 I wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine, 6 years before Photoshop, when we were using Cytex machines, which were like $1 million machines. And in the piece I wrote that in the future, we'll most probably have to ask the photographer, like Brian said, whether a picture is fiction or nonfiction, because we won't be able to tell. So that's 40 years ago, you know, that we've known about this. It's been a long time coming. And what often happens is that, you know, Marshall McLuhan has the idea that the fish are the last to know about the water. They don't know it's wet because they don't know what dry is. So people in the photo community have just assumed things, you know, we go to Arles, to photo festivals, we show each other our images, we win awards, we're happy campers. But we lost the ability more and more to get the outside world to pay attention to things with our images, right? We're not asking the questions, can they be useful to stop wars, to diminish wars, for climate change, for the elections? And those are the questions we used to ask. And Alexey's War Against War by Ernst Friedrich in 1924 was a hope to stop all wars forever because they're so horrible. That's what he wanted to do. So what I'm trying to get at is that we're celebrating rightfully the power of photography, but we're not safeguarding it. It's like the chief economist of Microsoft recently said, AI is like the invention of the automobile. You had to wait for a bunch of people to get killed before you put any regulations in. You know, red lights, green lights, seatbelts, driver's license. I don't believe that. So, you know, with Susan, with others here, over the years, we've had different campaigns for photographic integrity. It's not that hard to come up with a symbol, for example. If we came up with a symbol that we all agreed on, then maybe other people would follow us. You know, maybe we would start it, maybe we'd pressure companies, maybe we do a petition campaigns. You know, all the stuff people are doing about climate change is parallel. We've known about climate change for 40, 50 years, but people are doing stuff, you know, all kinds of stuff. But our community has been relatively silent all through this, you know, not saying that this is really screwing up what we do as a credible witnessing. We haven't done very much. So I'm not saying I have all the answers. I just know that it keeps me up at night, and we should be doing stuff about it. I don't know if Brian or anybody else?
You know, I just keep thinking of that Taylor Swift picture. You know? And you know what it made me think of is that, you know, we're so easy to blame the tool. Yes, of course, I mean, forms of governments must exist and have merit, but you know what, that picture made me think it's not about, the problem is not that we can easily deepfake a picture of Donald Trump and Taylor Swift. The problem is that we live in a country where Taylor Swift decides an election. I think that's kind of a, if that's the image of Taylor Swift, you know, that this is the argument, I think that's a deeper problem. But I think that these other issues need to be addressed as well. But in terms of visual literacy, of course, I mean, this is why there needs to be curriculum education and such. I completely agree.
I agree. We need media literacy. I think the problem, more than Taylor Swift being able to swing an election, is how Donald Trump and the Republican Party have made it legitimate to take the empirical, remove the idea that there has to be evidence in our national discourse. So if I'm conservative, I can agree that a pound of apples costs whatever, $2.99 at Met Food or Kroger, $3.29 at Whole Paycheck Foods. And if I'm a liberal, I can agree on that. But if I say apples actually cost $8 million a pound and corporate media goes along with it and social media goes along with that, then I think I think that's the problem, that we've divorced discourse from evidence, and that's okay. So I think one of the things that we stand up for with Writing with Light is the idea that, yeah, there is value in the empirical, and you can't have these debates about democracy unless you agree on that price of apples. You can make policy on it. You could say they need to be cheaper or more expensive, but we have to agree on that.
Just to go one side, the Writing with Light campaign, we started a year and a half ago with the Magnum photos, World Press photos, and so on. The idea is that a writer is an author. Words themselves are not immediately trustworthy. You trust the author. So it's the same with the camera. The camera at this point is not automatically trustworthy. You trust the author of the image. You know, let's say Brian Palmer. And so we're asking that a photographer be treated as an author just like a writer is. It's not about the technology, it's about the integrity of the person making the image. And that's the campaign that we've been pushing for about a year and a half with negligible success. You know, we've done an awful lot of outreach, but there's not much groundswell for it. So, you know, with Adobe and others, they put cryptographic information, you know, with the image, how it's been changed. We're not dependent on technology, we're dependent on human beings. That's what we're trying for. So that's one thing, your students or whoever, maybe they want to join, but we need more and more of these initiatives, to stabilize and get to a place where it's a fact-based society. It's not just whatever you want it to be. Question.
Hi everyone, good to see you. Hi Fred, hi Alexey, hi Susan, hi everyone. You anticipated my question as usual, but quote by Rancy actually comes to mind that fiction is not the opposite of truth. And I feel like, I wonder if there is a merit in slowing down a little bit and remembering that perhaps good and honest images have not there's a distinction between photograph, fiction, what it does. There are honest photographs that had no effect at all, that continue to happen, especially right now in huge volume and reach no one whatsoever. There perhaps been instances of photographs that were not fake in any way, but had incredibly negative connotation. And I wonder how we can open up that space to think about what the images do contextually in a way that creates possibility rather than the limitation through legislative curtail of technology or AI. Does it make sense?
No, I could not agree more. You know, absolutely. I think that contextualization. I mean, Fred, the four corners. I can bring that back too. It's like it's where we need to interrogate how the images are used and the meaning of images in circulation, because I don't think we do that enough. I mean, it's kind of like, speaking of visual literacy, where do you even start, right? Like, it's like because even we're looking at AI and looking at the problems actually of the problems of the 21st century data regimes, but we're looking at colonial archival practices and knowledge production practices. You know, it's all inherited and embedded into itself. So, but that's kind of all-encompassing issue, for sure.
I think slowing down is what we're doing here. And I feel like we have to be able to parse images and bodies of work and understand what they are and how they're created, and neither throw out one group of images or another group of images for technological reasons, but understand how they were made. And so there is truth in all kinds of imagery. You know, there's truth in Guernica. But we have to understand what it is. It's a painting, and I'm going to say that what I do is a quotation from reality. That's what I think nonfiction work is. There's power in fiction. They're just and there's power in nonfiction. They're just different things. And if we slow down, we can understand the merits without saying one sucks, one's good, one's better. Does that make sense?
I think the word you left out is objectivity, and I think nobody believes photography is objective. It's subjective, it's interpretive, it's all that. The problem is, if you go to a bookstore or library and you want the nonfiction books, they show you history. You want the fiction, you get novels and poetry. If I ask, is this fictional photography or non-fictional photography, we don't even have a vocabulary to start asking the questions. We don't, it's a photograph. When Susan and I worked in 1992 with New York Times and Time Magazine and all that, we tried to come up with a vocabulary to label images. So this would be a photo opportunity by John Smith, not a photograph. It's a photo opportunity or a staged photograph. This would be a portrait photograph by somebody. That's very different than a regular photograph. A reportage photograph, we wanted it to be labeled 32 years ago so that we would do exactly what you're asking. This is a fictional photograph by X person. And we know there's ambiguity, enormous, but I think the other word is context. You know, that we still count on photography, the 100th of a second, as somehow being emblematic and not needing all that kind of context. If you're a filmmaker, you need the context. A writer, you need the context. But, you know, as Alexey pointed out, there's various ways of giving lots more context. You know, I could click on your name and find your code of ethics. I could click on somebody's name and find 12 other images of the same situation. There's lots and lots of things we could be doing, and digitally it's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's just we can't be in the rear view mirror doing what we used to do. You know, the old McLuhan idea. Again, we didn't answer your question, but we're getting there. Over there.
Hello. So I'm hearing a lot about visual literacy, and we're obviously in a room where everyone understands what that is. There's also millions and millions of people that are playing with AI that don't know what that is, let alone know what ethical boundaries are. So when we talk about being able to put guardrails around what's being generated with AI tools, whether it's visual or, I mean, I'm in a weird space about this because I just saw a business pitch to help people with war-based PTSD to overcome that via AI. And I think there's a lot of ethical implications and issues with that. So how do we communicate to the public and AI user base at large what ethical boundaries are and where the lines are blurred and why it's important to draw that line?
I would just say we have to embed that in our work. When I talk to my students at the University of Richmond, the first thing I talk about is ethics, and whatever methodology you use, you have to be ethical and certainly have to understand the difference between nonfiction and fiction, the difference between therapeutic what you're going to publish. As Fred has shown, many of these images you are not going to make public because you realize that the damage that they can do, someone else will make them something like them, but you are not going to be responsible for disseminating an image that you believe is damaging and that could creep into the archive. That's not a full answer, but I think maybe someone else can piggyback.
What we didn't talk about in our 20 minutes is all the wonderful things AI can do. There are many. So one that was reported yesterday is predicting, based upon scientific estimates, what the Bowery on East 4th Street would look like 30 years from now if we don't do anything about climate change. Make photorealistic images of it, and rather than waiting for somebody to make photographs of the disaster and win a big award, we would proactively do something so the flooding doesn't occur as badly as it could. They could be used, and I've done work this way with people's thoughts and dreams and nightmares. If you're suffering from trauma, you could use synthetic imaging to show other people what happened to you, photorealistic, if it's not re-traumatizing. You know, that would be another way of doing it. It's underserved communities that don't have much of a photographic documentation. You can make your own using synthetic imaging. There's a lot of issues. National Geographic is the issue just coming out this week is all about scientific uses of it. It's going to be helpful in new drugs, in diagnosing illnesses, much more proactively, possibly years in advance, so that they can be dealt with earlier. There's all kinds of stuff going on that's really incredibly positive. But in this community of credible witnessing of photography, that's in our 20 minutes we're trying to get at that. But it's much more expansive, way more expansive than what we're getting at right now. But to me, there's a sense of humility. I really feel like the representational painter in 1845. I feel like the person who doesn't know what's going to happen. It's going to upset me in multiple ways, including making a living, but lots and lots of other ways. But this time what I'm trying to get at is, what do we do proactively instead of just waiting for the corporations to do it to us, or the governments? What can we do with it that's helpful and useful, just like what you're talking about? And I think these are the big questions right now to ask ourselves.
Thank you for the subject. Are there common markers in these algorithms that can be identified in a technological way that says, oh, hey, this is AI generated, right? So, I mean, if all the coding, I know there are many AI engines and all that, but is there a way to identify or help identify a file that comes through that says, hey, this is an either voluntary, this is an AI-generated image, or involuntary, meaning there are investigators who can say, hey, this is AI-generated?
Well, systems of detection are always behind of the ones that are generation. There are many tools that can do what you're saying, but you can also just print an image out, rephotograph it, put it online, and it's indecipherable. So I want to look at it more like we've dealt with spam pretty well. Like, if we haven't had spam filters, you would not get any email today. Like, you would not be able to see the emails. So it's kind of going in that direction. But to answer your question, in the technical terms, yes, there are some artifacts and ways of looking at an image file to see if it's generated or not, but that could be compromised as well.
And just on top of that, the errors that those systems make are often saying that actual photographs are AI. In other words, they misidentify actual photograph and saying not. And what Alexey says is, this is a printout of one of the images I just showed you. How could you tell? There's nothing on the back of it. I could put it on the wall, no problem. So none of them are 100% sure. And again, what Alexey says is that they're always ahead of the detection people. It's always behind.
Thanks for the talk. Fred, picking up on your comment about it's going to be our community that's going to have to figure this out one way or another, with the starting point of, I'm sure many people here, including myself, would love to be part of the solution. I've been thinking a bit about the initiatives like your own, for example, like 4 Corners or the 5th Corner or Writing Applied. There have been attempts to, proposals have been available and put out and advocated for, and in my own thinking, I feel that part of the issue is that there isn't the desire for uptake. I mean, we've been talking a lot about images and the authenticity of the photographs, but major papers like the Times, the Journal, the Post, they all still use photojournalists. Like it hasn't been, they've been replaced with AI, and they still have, on the print side, people writing stuff, but that hasn't stopped us from getting to this moment of a sort of a post-truth, post-literate, media as entertainment thing. So I guess our question would be, where do you feel do you feel the place to start is more still within the photographic community and putting forth proposals, or is it, elsewhere? And I could, have a couple thoughts, but that's, yeah.
No, I mean, to Russ's credit, we were going to be 4 people talking tonight, and one of them was going to be an editor of a newspaper magazine, a photo editor, who would then talk from the inside how they're dealing with it. We couldn't get anybody to appear. And, part of it may be scheduling, but part of it may also be that they're not transparent. Like, I would like every newspaper on the front page just to say, our policy on AI is X, Y, and Z. When we use it, we put in the caption, whatever it is. I would also like to know the policy of take Photoshop with generative AI now. So I could photograph you and change the background in 12 seconds so you're in Alaska. So I'm starting with a photograph, but I'm adding AI and all this, Google, all these ads now that make the memories what you want them to be. Forget photography. I would start with that too. I think all we can do is keep talking and keep trying and keep getting different groups. When it happened to Taylor Swift, the deep fake, suddenly the government got interested for about 3.5 minutes because it was Taylor Swift. But other people, they don't care. We didn't talk about synthetic pornography of children. There's going to be millions, there already are millions and millions of images which are horrific. And it's going to affect every family because it's out there. And then the issue there is also, if it doesn't use a real child, can you prosecute? Will you prosecute? Do you have enough people to do it? So it's not just our community that's going to suffer. It's lots of communities that are already suffering. The nudify apps, where 12-year-old boys are nudifying the girls in their class so the girls won't leave home because they're so embarrassed, is already happening in multiple countries. So what does it take to get people to respond? Any community I would talk to, I say, it's our problem. If I'm talking to a group of doctors tomorrow, lawyers, it's our problem. It's everybody's problem. So it's not meant that, we're the only ones who have to deal with it. It's all over the place.
Hi. Just to sort of build and to go back a little bit on the conversation, how I understand the desire to label what's artificial image and what's a lens-based image, but throughout history, people have faked lens-based images or used Photoshop as soon as that came available, even for photojournalism, or tried to pass it off as photojournalism. I think what you said earlier about educating is what's more important, because what we see happening now, people, depending on who's saying what, it doesn't even need to be, there needs to be no evidence. People are believing it, so what does it matter if it's labeled AI or lens-based? The more important thing, I think, personally, and maybe I'll get chased out of the room for this, is just that we stick to the truth of lens-based photojournalism, at least, and educate people, educate society on the facts, or how to read the facts.
Just very, very quickly, Fred mentioned that we weren't able to get an editor to come here. We've also reached out to major imaging corporations writing with light over a year and a half, and we've talked to some people from the companies we've discussed tonight, and they feign interest, I think, would be the way to put it. But I think they want to have their cake and they want to eat it too, as Fred said about Adobe. And I think we need one entity or two entities to kind of step up and say, we want to be responsible and we want to help save democracy. So we will do responsible things like offer transparency. We can push for it, but really, look at what we face, the fire hose of Adobe and Google and social media. I mean, I think we have to come together and stand for what you're saying, Aaron, which is lens-based nonfiction photography. Fred was saying, you know, we may become a niche, we may become boutique, whatever. I'm still going to do it because I think it matters. And I do believe, as Fred has said, I have all these talks with Fred, because Fred kind of brings me down to earth, but I do believe that democracy depends on this evidence-based kind of work, and I'm going to fight for it in this venue, and I'm going to fight for it in the classroom, and we'll continue to try and get these publications and entities to speak up for transparent, responsible journalism and codes of ethics and that sort of stuff.
I mean, just going up, Brian, what really gets me is, you know, we're flooding, you know, climate change, but these companies know it, but making money is still more important than ruining the earth. And the same thing we're seeing here is, you know, you take Hannah Arendt and various, you know, people have written about this. Once society doesn't know what's going on, that's when dictatorship starts. Because we can't vote, we have no way of knowing. We want the strong person to lead us. And that's where we are right now. We're very close to having an election going to a dictatorship. So what more evidence do we need that a kind of a fact-based, reality-based is important? I agree with you, you know, what you're saying about lens-based. I would use AI on a newspaper in certain circumstances and label it, but I would also have something where you could click on the word AI and find out what it is and how to use it. Not just use the word AI. A lot of people don't know what that means. So I'd be as transparent as possible. Back in the 90s, when Photoshop was there, O.J. Simpson, if you remember all that stuff, that darkened cover, you know, they would say, we know what we're doing, we don't have to be transparent, trust us. It didn't get us very far. We have to be transparent, we have to be open in all ways, and, you know, including in journalism. It's, you know, like Susan and I were at Magnum today for this film, and I remember Cartier-Bresson saying to me, photojournalism is keeping a journal with a camera, keeping a diary with a camera. It's okay to be personal. You take responsibility for the image. It's authentic that way. It's yours. You know, the camera is not some objective truth teller. It's all these things. So I think we have to move in lens-based and synthetic, what stuff that Alexey's doing, all kinds of stuff.
Just also wanted to add, there are developer efforts and generative AI that shows sources. There's perplexity.ai, it's an alternative to ChatGPT that gives you citations where it pulled the information from, so it's being generous and providing transparent of providing what the sources are. So there are ways to counteract on that as well. It's like it's not all bad. Good, I guess that was the sign.
You want Brian to say something?
The last words, just that's,
yeah.
You know.
You get a last word.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. It's just fabulous to see you here.
I have much longer last word. I mean, you know, when two things actually, two small, maybe like 20 words, okay? Well, first set is quoting Ursula Le Guin is you know, a difference between a weapon and a tool is how you hold it. And the second one is if we think of, going off what Fred started, but comparing AI to the time now to the time when photography came into painting era. So if photography liberated art from its aura, like according to Benjamin, then I think that AI has a potential to liberate photography from its authority over truth, and that photography can evolve into other things. I think it's a really exciting time to be in. That's my last word.
I get to follow his last word. The more I do AI, the more I see photography as a construct. I don't see it anymore as a window of something real. I see it as a construct that's highly subjective and could be used in different ways by multiple. And as a result, I become more skeptical, more open to the ambiguity of photography as opposed to the old, the camera doesn't lie. So it actually opens up photography into new possibilities. So if you stay with the idea of that Alexey just said, that photography came along and liberated painting from being just representational, you could ask the question, what is the AI liberating photography from being, so photography opens up in a more expansive way? And that's another question, going off your question, that we could ask our community. What are the newer strategies, more expansive strategies, other strategies, so we're not just repeating those of the 20th century? And that would be it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.